Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here to continue our set of season-ending reviews by position group. And we've got the last one still to do tonight, the quarterback position, of course. And here to do that with me is my good friend Jordan Coe. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Nice to be chatting with you.
Oh, always a pleasure. We wish we didn't have it happening this early. We wish we were talking about the offense and offensive line and whatnot from the Super Bowl tonight, or maybe the defense even still, because hey, we'd be coming back from the Super Bowl and you and I would, be getting over a craps roll in one way or another, positive, good or bad. But anyway, such was not the case this year, and we're here wrapping it up for the Ravens positional reviews this year, and then we get into the true off-season content starting with the very next show. But we're here to talk about Lamar Jackson and his season, age 26, his sixth season. Came off 3 straight years where he couldn't stay healthy. I think that's probably the biggest single factor about this year, is stayed healthy the whole year, and he played like Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see the adjustments. I think that Lamar has made some additional adjustments about trying to keep himself healthy. You can see during certain times and certain plays him going down, him getting out of the way, him kind of moving around just a little bit differently. Except when he's kind of like the fumble in the Chiefs game when he's been completely blindsided. He really just has been. I think he's taken his ability to not take hits to an incredible level. We saw one of those jump throws that he had. I'm trying to remember which game it was, where he felt the contact from the defensive player pushing through the tackle, and that's why he jumped on the throw. I think in the past that was one of those ones where he might just make that throw and maybe he gets rolled up on, and maybe there's a little bit of concern there. And so it's obvious that he knows that he's got to stay healthy. He's got to be around at the end of the season. And that if he wants to be in any of these conversations about greats or MVP or whatever that looks like, it's got to include Lamar being ready when playoff time rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. And the rest of the AFC North all had quarterback injuries, significant quarterback injuries. Watson, of course, lost the Bengals down to their second quarterback, I guess, only with Browning, right? And the Pittsburgh down to their fourth at one point with Mason Rudolph. So a difficult season other places in the AFC. I'm sorry, the Browns were down to their fourth, right, with Flacco.
Right. Comeback player of the year.
Yeah, there you go. But a great year for Lamar just to stay healthy. But I kind of want to reflect back on where we were last summer to start this, and just in terms of the contract process. This point last year, Lamar was about to be franchise tagged. It was an acrimonious time between that tag being applied, and Lamar basically, not being very happy about it and making some comments in the press. I thought one of the nice things about it was the Ravens, I thought, it held their end up very well. Treated Lamar like family the whole time, in terms of it's always the most difficult conversation, but never said anything bad about Lamar.
Yeah, I think it was one of those ones where Lamar did what he had to do and was the smart thing to do. He had to basically spread the word that he was going to try and pressure them to get the biggest contract that he needed to do without an agent. The best way to do that was the media. I don't think that there was any real chance that Lamar was going anywhere. I think the Ravens had a good sense of what the market already was and who had a willingness and a tolerance to sign him to some kind of outlandish contract. I think that, for example, if someone like Arthur Blank and the Falcons were ready to really roll it out and devastate their cap in some kind of poison pill type contract, I think they would have told the Ravens that beforehand, negotiated some kind of trade to benefit them beforehand, and at least let them have some sense of what the market would set, right? Like the Ravens have all the power there to negotiate, or at least have some sense of where everybody on the market is in advance of that, unless they were playing some kind of game about that. And so I think that the plan, everybody always knew between the Ravens front office and Lamar that he was staying.
Yes. And you remember, if anyone had signed him, it would have been 2 first-round draft picks would have had to be given up. So it's the amount of that amount of draft capital is just absurdly high. I mean, it is obviously something that Browns did in order to trade for Deshaun Watson, which is crazy in his own right, and then to give him a contract of that size, it's very unusual. But the fact that the Ravens basically, told the other teams to put up or shut up, and then the other teams were basically, we're not setting the market for him. I mean, in some ways it's a smart thing for the other teams to say that, because it kind of frames the Ravens as villains in the process. It's what maybe this is collusion, maybe it's not, but we're not putting up with this crap, and it may even help them, keep their own quarterback at some point in the future. Of course, if you're on the outside of the glass looking in without one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the game or something, your Super Bowl chances are very minimal. And I think you probably are looking at that differently.
Well, and it's so fascinating. I think this all played out in the way it played out because Lamar represents himself. He did a fantastic job. When it's all added up at the end of it, he did get the same kind of deal that any agent would have gotten him without having to pay the vig on whatever that was going to cost him. But I do think that some of the acrimony that has been created by the media around this was driven by the fact that he was representing himself, and was driven by kind of these owners, agent kind of buddy system that already exists in place, where players are convinced that having an agent is going to be to their advantage, to everybody's advantage. And there are win-wins when certain players sign certain contracts of certain magnitudes, early or late or whatever that looks like in the process. But I don't know, just to me, given the fact that it turned out so well for Lamar getting exactly what he wanted for it, it tells me that like you were saying, there are other things at play in some of these decisions about how they want to play out and how they want some of these things to look in certain ways down the road.
Let me be clear about this. I don't think there was actual collusion involved. I think that basically any other owner is looking at this is, I'm going to set the market and I'm going to give up 2 first-round draft picks. So when I do have to sign a quarterback, it's going to cost me that much more. There's no reason for me to do this. First of all, the two first-round draft picks is a prohibitive incremental expense to the contract itself. Absolutely prohibitive. And the only way you could justify it is basically, like knowing Secretariat was going to win the Triple Crown. You have to know Lamar Jackson's going to win the MVP, which he actually did. So was he worth $80 million this year? Sure. He did have that sort of value, but there's just no way that if I were a general manager, that I'd be sacrificing 2 number 1 picks to also sign an enormous contract for any player. And that's why basically there's no one who's broken free of the franchise tag as it's been done.
And don't misinterpret my statement as perceived intentional collusion, because I don't think that's what this was. I just think that there were the reasons why each team did it individually and chose not to pursue Lamar included other reasons that would benefit them in the future as it related to player negotiations. And so they didn't collectively, they all wanted the same thing. I don't think there were any calls between anybody where they were proactively saying, hey, let's do this together. But I think they all came to the same conclusion. And so they all did the same thing. That's not the same as collusion.
Okay, let me frame that up for you differently, and I'll ask it as a question. Okay, and I want other people out there listen to this question and try and help you. So Jordan is saying there's some percentage of it in terms of what teams thought they could get out of this negotiating process in the future, for when they had their own quarterback, when they needed to get their own quarterback. Add anything to that, you would. Is that pretty well encapsulated? Okay, and then the others.
All of that, yeah.
Okay, and negotiate with agents. Good point. Okay, so all of that is in column A. Column B is 2 first-round draft picks. I want you to give me the percentage of value that goes into each of column A and column B.
Oh, it's heavily weighted, probably 85-15. I'd have to give that some. I think that you have to give that some serious thought about how close you are, and do you think you are as a team, and where your first round draft pick was in the upcoming year that you would be giving up. Because if you were a team that was giving up the 20th pick and then you thought that you were ready to be Super Bowl contenders with Lamar, that's significantly less than, say, the Falcons, who I think had a much lower pick,
Mm-hmm.
or Carolina. I mean, and look, 2 first-round draft picks is a lot of draft capital, but we watched the Carolina Panthers do it for somebody that had absolutely no track record in the NFL at all whatsoever. And you can talk about cap implications all you want, but teams on the average are wasting the top quarterbacks in the league's cap space on dead cap space on non-quarterback players regularly, or players that are getting hurt or aren't contributing. So at some point,
I'm sorry, I didn't
anyway,
hear a
going back to
percentage here. I didn't hear a percentage. So how much
I
is
said
the draft
85-15. 85-15 if you have our early round draft pick. I would say that slides way down to like 60-40 if you are 20th or later in the first pick that you're giving up.
Okay. See, first of all, it's the trailing pick, which often matters. So you didn't have Lamar Jackson in the year, and you're getting Lamar Jackson now. Now, maybe he's replacing another quarterback. Maybe he still had a decent season, maybe even squeaked into the playoffs, and you still have pick number, 19 or 20 or something. You're dealing with, but probably you have a pick in the top 17 or something. All right. And then your next pick, if Jackson gets you to the playoffs, doesn't get hurt himself, you're giving up a low pick. But if we're talking total value there, that's pretty damn substantial still. 85-15, I liked your number there. I thought that was about right in terms of the things. I think that there may also be some value, but this is nothing like we lived through collusion in the mid 1980s in baseball, where the owners literally got together and they said, here's what we're going to play for a catcher who has approximately this, try and build a framework for this. And let's agree that this is what, Lance Parrish's market value is. And we'll, go back to him with this. You go back to him with this offer and see if he takes it. It's not that at all. I mean, the cap is entirely spent. So it's just a zero-sum game of who gets that money. And I think that the draft capital is the thing that's not spent, and it's clearly the bulk of what's going on there now. But there are some teams probably who didn't want to be put in the position of giving the Ravens an easy out on Jackson, and also kind of maybe wanted to make the Ravens seem like a villain by having that be a protracted exercise. The Ravens are maybe much less of an attractive landing spot for some other players. And, if you're an AFC competitor, maybe that has value.
Well, look at a team like the Falcons, who are picking 8th in this upcoming draft. They were 7-10 last year. If Lamar Jackson, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts are running together on that Atlanta offense, and the defense was much better than they expected it to be, that's a team that I think is probably wins 12 games in a pretty mediocre division.
Bijan Robinson is out because they just picked him with the 7th pick. So you don't have him anymore to trade for Lamar Jackson. You don't.
Wouldn't the trade have happened after the NFL? Wasn't Lamar tagged? He didn't sign until after the NFL draft.
No, that's when he signed, but he got tagged earlier. So if you're going to tag
but he could have been traded. So they could have negotiated the trade post draft.
Potentially, that is possible.
Well, you're still under the tag at that point.
Yeah, there might be some limitation on when you can trade the player. I know there is a time when the last date when you could sign him long term. I'm not sure what the rules are in terms of tagging. Anyway, let's get back to Lamar Jackson's season here. We can probably see reasons why this would exist, but there are a great process for the Ravens to get through. At the end of it, they were really like family making up. In terms of this, we never heard really the topic come up again during the season at any point. Do you get the sense at all that Lamar Jackson bears the Ravens any ill will over the process?
No, not at all. And Lamar has basically all but come out and said that his intention was to sign and stay with Baltimore, and that he was aware of what was going on in the process. And it's just part of the gamemanship, and you let that be what it's going to be. All right.
So anyway, for me, that's one of the successes of the 2023 Ravens season is they got the Lamar Jackson situation resolved without actual bloodshed. There was a little bit of cap shed with the Odell Beckham contract, but no real bloodshed. Now let's fold in Todd Monken, who was the biggest change for Jackson this year. Coach Jackson has his own agenda of things he's working on. And he wants to do better, but Roman had built an offense around him. And there was a real question as to whether Monken would be able to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we've seen Monken at both the college level and the pro level. And so there were some questions in terms of what he was going to be able to do, what he was going to be able to potentially bring in. And I think that you saw a really good balance from Todd Monken. I do, going back and looking at the numbers for the year, it's stunning how much the Ravens, everybody, including me, I'll say that I'm in this group of people that wants to see the Ravens throw the ball a little bit more. The Ravens were still incredibly run heavy under Todd Monken. And so whether that was game situation due to the defense being very good this year and having a lead, or whether that was just construction of the team, the assets and strengths of the team when Monken came in, he seemed to be able to at least be able to blend in and tie into some of those things. So, it'll be very interesting to see what part Monken has to play in how they build the offense for next year and how they stack on top of that. I think if you see consecutive years of kind of the growth with the offense or the growth with Lamar that we saw last year, Monken's going to get a lot of that credit. And it'll be very interesting to see his potential candidacy for a head coaching job or just kind of like how he's regarded in the league as a result of that.
Right. I do think a lot of what the Ravens did this year was situational football that allowed them to run the ball like crazy. And what is one of the really good things is Monken was able to fold elements that already existed in the Ravens culture, their offensive culture, keep them and still make use of a player like Patrick Ricard and still run the ball very effectively right down the throats of opponents that knew it was coming. And there is just nothing they could do about it, which, by the way, is some of the most fun football for me to watch, is just watching a team just get dog tired out on the field trying to defend the Ravens run game. Just one of the most fun things. All right. One of the things that I think was really good about Monken and also good about Lamar was the change in the offense. Really, Monken came in with lofty claims right away about making the opponent defend every blade of grass, and your offense is balanced if the defense is constantly having to do that. I thought this is one of the things that really showed up, and I think there's some statistical measures you can look at to really just see how well it worked out. That the Ravens, you really did use the entire width of the field. I mean, we talked about in previous years, Lamar having a lot of trouble throwing outside the numbers in particular.
Yeah, well, I think, and I don't have the stat in front of me, but I think that the Ravens were like on average significantly wider in terms of what their formations look like. I think the wide receiver personnel contributed to that, but I do think that Monken making that a priority with Lamar and making him capable of being able to ID those throws to the outside. Because I think that the problem with Lamar has never been maybe a little bit of arm strength when you've got those deep outs that, the ones that you would see Joe Flacco fire like 15 to 18 yards down the field where he's throwing it before they break and it's a bullet. But Lamar's got the anticipation and the timing to be able to line some of those up. It was really just the ability to read when guys had a sense of that coming. I don't know whether that was the wide receivers. I mean, Zay Flowers makes a big difference. We saw it in the Texans game where he had Stingley on him and he broke on like that deep 15 to 18 yard route out. And he just beat his man much better than you've seen Ravens wide receivers do with Lamar. So the ability to fold kind of some of those threats in, be wider with some of that, I think is really going to be where the Ravens continue to build. And then especially with Likely's emergence, how are the Ravens going to use that? Are they going to stay wide? Are they going to stay tight if they're going to be more of a 12 team? We'll probably talk about some of that in the future, but I'd like to see them continue to stay wide in those formations. And I think Andrews coming back is going to be a really interesting part of how this offense continues to evolve in 2025, 2024.
Well, they certainly could use some YY formations to do that, 2x2, kind of formations. But the thing that I think is most impressive about the throwing outside is how much better it made Lamar throwing between the numbers. And specifically, it's the tight end numbers are just ridiculous this year. The passer rating throw into each of the three was at least, I think, 135, 136, something like that. And with Likely, it was 152. With Kolar, it might have been 144. And I forget whether Andrews was 138 or something, but it was the highest number of his career as well. Even though, he's had a great career to date, he had been showing declining passer rating against until 22. And when you have a constant function of that, a constant trend of that, you have to break it somehow. And I think Monken came in, and that's the nicest thing I can possibly say about his, the amount of wide receiver targets there were this year is I think it made the tight end targets were a lot less. There were only 110 total targets of the tight end this year. Not a whole lot of Andrews and Likely playing together. But those 110 targets were pure gold. 12 touchdowns, no interceptions, 140 or so passer rating. That was a pretty sweet improvement.
Yeah, and I think the other, big area that, you point to in terms of improvement and doesn't feel as good because it didn't work in the Kansas City game, but the checks and Lamar's ability to have more control at the line of scrimmage and be more empowered, whether it was in the play calls themselves before they got to that point, or whether it was once he was at the line of scrimmage. I think that a lot of you saw what happened in the Super Bowl. San Francisco decided that they weren't going to do what Baltimore did. And even when you saw heavy boxes from the Chiefs, they were still going to try and run at it. And they had less than 4 yards per carry in the Super Bowl. And I think that the game plan going into that game was, if we see these heavy fronts, we've got to be throwing the ball. I'd like to see more diversity in how they adjust some of those checks, getting to the line faster and spreading teams out.
Mm-hmm.
I think could really enhance Lamar's capability there. But that was not a system that existed before 2023 season. Like, Lamar was not having that kind of check. The Ravens would have looked a lot more like Kansas City did in that game, or I'm sorry, the Niners did in that game, where they were running into heavy fronts. And who knows whether or not they were going to have success with that or not. But I think the Ravens would have continued to run into those heavy fronts historically before this. And that's one of the biggest sea changes that we saw under Monken.
Right. Greatly reduced interception rate for Lamar. And one thing that's fantastic, by the way. And a lot of that is just not having a forced extended play target, not having an automatic guy he has to go to in Andrews. The Andrews injury obviously was not an ideal situation for the Ravens, but I don't think it cost them anything in the end. I think they actually probably gained from it in terms of what they know about the talent they have now on the roster. They certainly won all those games and secured the number one seed without Andrews, and then beating the hell out of him. And then Andrews came back. Of course, they lost the AFC Championship game, not because of him. He only played 18 snaps, but it was what it was. But I thought the Ravens learned a lot. They obviously, figured out who Isaiah Likely was, and now they're not going to be forgetting that going into next year. And I think they probably have an idea, better idea of what they want to do at wide receiver based on who Likely and Andrews are going into 24.
Well, and I think you and I have talked about this on other podcasts of the concept of kind of like failing forward and like forcing players up into situations where you have to find out how they're going to be, and they're either going to rise or they aren't. And so even if Likely had not turned out to be the player that we hoped he would become and that we saw during that stretch of time, then that too, right? And you can make those adjustments and make those decisions moving forward. But the Ravens have a dynamic set of two tight ends now, and they know that specifically, like you were saying, because of the Andrews injury.
Right. And I wouldn't even downplay the role that Kolar has. Though Kolar is kind of running out of time to be a more valuable player, but had fairly solid results as a receiver, just not enough total time on for pass plays and not enough being in the pass pattern himself to be that significant. But honestly, very effective on a per target basis when the ball was thrown his way. What else we want to talk about here? One of the big things that no one really wants to talk about is that Lamar's a little slower than he used to be. He bulked up for 22, I believe it was, coming back from his 21 injury. And he was somewhat slower then. In the 19 and 20 Lamar, we saw 19 to the outside, 20 with the up the middle threat that he was out of sidecar. I don't think the Ravens think of that as having the kind of breakaway capacity that it once did.
I think it's a choice by Lamar. Gabe and I have had this argument a couple of different times. I'm trying to remember in the Chiefs game. I mean, on the pass that he tipped to himself, he was almost gone. He was a shoestring tackle away from a touchdown. And then on the other play where he broke out to the right, he was in the upper third, of the Chiefs defense and chose to try and break back inside the safety instead of beating him to the corner and just turning on the jets and going at full speed. I think Lamar runs pretty much between 70 and 85% all the time now. And that he wants to stay in control. He wants to be able to make decisions about which directions he's going, what's safest for him in that process. What you saw in 19 and 20 was Lamar running as fast as he could. Didn't matter why, didn't matter where he was going to, and he was going to run as hard as he could and as fast as he could. And he's just not doing that anymore.
Okay, first of all, completely agree with your first part, which is that he's basically doesn't take it out of third gear very often. And he's always looking to make the next man miss as his priority, as opposed to out racing the next man, which sometimes that's the right call, in what's going on here, but very rarely puts it in fourth gear. We saw it on a few touchdown runs this year, but they were shorter ones and not the 50s we saw against the NFC East or, against the Dolphins. I think he had a 75 or whatever. Maybe it was the Giants. He had a 75, but anyway, the big runs otherwise that he's had. The part I wouldn't agree with is that I think Lamar really did show you more in the previous years in terms of turning up the heat all the way. And just the spin move, obviously, they put on the Bengals linebacker, whose name is escaping me right now. The guy who had the most tackles ever of Lamar, but still will be remembered by his grandchildren for getting spun away from him on the Houdini play. It's a I think we do not. I think we. Lamar's always kind of been a third gear runner. There's always been only been occasional times ever where he's really pulled fourth gear out of there. And that really included in 2019, even on those runs to the edge, he's most of that time, he's worried about how am I going to make the first guy miss and then get a lot of yards to the edge.
Yeah. And also, it's also just opportunity too, though, right? Because if you're running 12 to 14 design quarterback runs a game, in addition to another 12 to 14 read option plays, Lamar gets 28 chances to pick his spot to take it all the way up to the anticipation that he wants to. Whereas if your preparation in the lead up to the game is where are we going to throw the ball? What are our checks? What are we doing for this? As opposed to what are the run blocking schemes? What are the run blocking tendencies? And where do we think a crease will open up if X, Y, and Z happens? And now you run as fast as you can through that hole because you know that you're probably going to be able to score a touchdown on that. Look, nobody is going to be as fast as they are at 26 as they are at 23. They're going to lose a little, and he's not going to be as fast at 29 as he is at 26. So those are just realities of the truth. So I'm not kind of arguing with the physics of that. But I think that Lamar has more in him than we see, and the design of the offense just isn't built around that. I'm very curious. If Ricard stays on this roster and the Ravens want to go into a 12 or 22 heavy look and they want to use Ricard like Nick Boyle in 2019, which I think he could play that kind of role really effectively, I don't think the Ravens are going to go back to a run heavy team, but the formula is there. For them to get really heavy and really decide that they want to run the ball next year, who knows?
Major difference from the 2019 offense is the RPOs, because the Ravens only went into the mesh and threw the ball how many times in 2019? I know the actual number. How many times do you think it was?
It wasn't many. It wasn't their approach.
3. Twice against Miami in week 1, and it's once in week 4 or week 5. I forget whether it's the Cleveland game or the Pittsburgh game, but they had their third of the whole year, and they totally pitched that away. And I had a friend of mine was working on a project with me to look at various types of play action they used, which will include mesh point play action, but also other forward-facing fakes and turning your back play action. So those are the 3 categories we're trying to divide on. And there are a whole bunch of these little hand checky fakes, but they did basically the RPO wasn't part of the offense. They basically were a mesh point team for designed runs. And they did not throw the ball out of that. They didn't pull the ball out of that and throw it. Now they do that a lot. And, that's really a primary source of runs for Lamar. Oftentimes they end up being scrambles because he pulls it down to pass and then he ends up scrambling. But it's a very different offense. And you know what? One of the things about the Monken offense, because it's more pass heavy and because they do more they get behind the sticks more, and it's more of a sputtering explosive and sputtering offense. When the cylinders are hitting right, they get some big chunks of yardage. They move right down the field and they score. It hasn't been as efficient as the 2019 offense. The 2019 offense was miles in front of even the 23 offense, where Lamar's very good in terms of its effectiveness, putting together long drives and the debilitating impact that had on their opponents. But they had 3.08 yards per drive, and this year they're at 2.48. Good total, fifth in the NFL. Nothing wrong with it. Basically met every standard that I would reasonably set for Lamar in terms of getting to a high level. But they weren't the most elite offense in the league, despite the fact they beat the crap out of some really good teams.
Yeah, I think some of that also ended up being injuries at running back too, in the way things were designed, and then the quality, and Justice Hill played great. Gus Edwards played well for kind of what you might have expected from him coming back from. But if Keaton Mitchell and J.K. Dobbins were fully healthy, I think it's a totally different dynamic that you get from some of that. And
yeah.
A lot of that kind of, when we talk about the differences between what we think happened in 23 versus 24, is how much that is going to be baked in. I think there's going to be potentially, depending on what the Ravens do at running back in free agency, a lot less running baked into this offense on the front end, in theory, as we kind of look at it right now. But that could evolve easily. And Keaton Mitchell, if he comes back in the second half of the year, I mean, he was a game breaker. And the Ravens, you could tell that what Lamar does for spacing in the field for a guy that has the elite quickness that Keaton Mitchell has, what that does for them, and what it did for J.K. Dobbins in his rookie and second year before we started to see the injuries crop up for him. So it's very interesting. Lamar still brings that dynamic component threat in terms of what some of that's going to do, and that'll take some of your potentially, hopefully, first and tens, second and longs, into get them into second and mediums. And maybe that changes the dynamic of some of what this looks like too. It felt like the Ravens were in second and long much more than I would have preferred often this year.
Yeah, they basically barfed up a lot of variances to the defense. That's exactly what any defense wants you to do is give them variance, and they did it. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that was a problem. The running back injuries were, it should have been that the tight end helped them more. And so I kind of feel like a hypocrite in this way, but we've just had this great season with 110 targets for tight ends at, 140 quarterback rating or whatever it was in total. But all three, obviously just killing it. And I know I've been saying for years that there's decreasing marginal value to each incremental target for Mark Andrews. And by the way, the number is 195 last year. Now they're playing one of the heaviest offenses around, but to drop from 195 to 110, my immediate reaction is, boy, why didn't we have more tight end targets? But the truth of the matter is, honestly, each one is probably going to give you a little bit less. The problem is when you're at 12 touchdowns, no interceptions, 9.5 yards per target, you can accept them to be a little bit less effective on, say, 30 more targets.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be, there's a lot of intrigue, I think, about kind of how things played out in 23 and how the Ravens will adjust to those things in 24. And it's something that, honestly, for as disappointed as we are where we are right now, and hearing everybody essentially chatter about how good and dominant this Ravens team was, I think it's an exciting thing to look towards for next year about kind of what decisions do they decide to go on the offense? How do they steer all of this collectively together? And how do they do that through Lamar? Because whether the Ravens assumed that Lamar was going to be there or not, you have to believe that there were still safety valves in the process of decisions that were made until he was signed that were, just in case Lamar isn't here, we have to do these kind of like X and Y and Z potential things. And that could be any range of things that held back the offense a little bit, 1%, 2%, 3%. But those could be things at the end of the day that take the Ravens from being fifth in kind of average length of drive to first next year.
Okay. So compromises made to the fact that Lamar was on the tag. My question for you, naturally, you know what it is why won't those same problems still exist this year with Justin Madubuike on the tag?
Oh, if he's on the tag and they don't get him signed, they potentially very well could.
But it's going to be, it has more of a pervasive effect than that. They'll probably wriggle to try and get off the tag. and want to go out and sign a long-term deal right away. So they'll have to put him on the tag. And then there'll be a period of time where the Ravens don't know. And it basically means the early part of free agency, the Ravens will lose out on because he'll be tagged and they won't have cap space to make moves.
So the distinction here is that if they decide they want to tag Madubuike and keep him on board, it'll probably be an exclusive tag. So there's no existential threat of him being signed, and there's no adjustment needed around what you might want to do on defense with the threat of somebody signing Madubuike for 2 firsts, right? Like if that's the world that the Ravens are living in, you're happy, right? And you're going to take that value because you don't think you can even get a first for him if you trade him.
I mean, it'll be a non-exclusive tag. First of all, nobody signed to the exclusive tag, so it'll definitely be non-exclusive.
Oh, not exclusive, but two firsts being the deal for Justin Madubuike is untenable. 2 firsts for Lamar Jackson being signed is tenable.
Somebody might do that. You're right.
Right. So that's the difference. So then you have to have an emergency valve around that piece. Whereas if Justin Madubuike leaves and the Ravens get 2 firsts, the Ravens will be the happiest team in the league.
Yeah, that's true. They won't be upset by that at all. But he won't leave for that. The problem is that they'll be in this death throes of having to either sign him or trade him long term from the time they put the tag on him until the time they get either accomplished. It's like it's an enormous pig that has to move through the snake before you can make other moves in terms of what you can do during the offseason. So I don't know if Madubuike will really use that against the Ravens, but I think it would be natural for his agent to try and lever some additional dollars out of them to get the get the contract done or terms, whichever it might be. So it makes sense to me. I'm probably in the camp that the Ravens are better off with a tag and trade situation, depending on the value they can get. But I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Is what's the minimum value you need to get from Madubuike to make that a worthwhile deal?
Yeah, I think we briefly talked about this the last time we chatted, and you definitely seemed as though you were a bit more tag and trade leaning. I don't think that. I think he needs to stay. It would have to be a first round pick type value coming back for me to see Madubuike leave. But I think the reason I think that is that, one, I don't think that there are that many holes on the Ravens roster that need to be filled behind Madubuike. So that's also why it's not the Ravens didn't have a lot of holes last year either. But there's not all of these kind of gaping necessities that need to be filled. So even if you do have to kind of move a few things around, if you are willing to, if the concession is Ronnie Stanley is staying right in the first place, and we're going to let him play left tackle next year, no matter what. And so then you get everything else kind of worked out around that. Obviously, at edge, you want to see some improvement or some depth that's brought on. You've got to figure out what you're doing at wide receiver, but you're set at tight end. You're mostly set. You have to decide what you want to do with Zeitler or not, but you're mostly set on the offensive line. Set an inside linebacker. You've got to bring in a safety, but you only need a free safety that's really slightly above league average, I'd say. A guy that can defend half the field and play true free safety.
5th, 6th round pick, easy.
Right. Yep. Maybe cornerback depth, and that's it. So the Ravens now, obviously, if they can make a splash and it's in an impact place in an impact way, particularly there's a way to do that on the offensive line. I think the Ravens shouldn't hesitate to do that. But beyond that, I think there's not that many. That's why the Ravens are being looked at as a seriously competitive team next year, despite having so many free agents. I think that they figure out how to get one of Van Noy or Clowney back. I think that depth and an improved number of snaps for OA is going to be just fine in terms of what this defense does. I think there are enough people still in the room that it's the same approach that they're going to take under McDonald. I think I really like Zachary Orr as the choice for defensive coordinator. I think that he fits the personality of Roquan Smith, and that's going to elevate this defense as well. So as a result, I think that to tie this all back, I think that Madubuike just kind of stays because there isn't anywhere else to use the cap money. There's not another defensive tackle. I guess if you were trading Madubuike, getting a second and then signing Chris Jones because the Chiefs decided to let him go, I would be down for that.
I think it's more like you have some opportunity to sign some other players. Like, let's say you could sign Clowney and Zeitler, let Madubuike go, and pick up a 2nd round pick, high second. I mean, I think I'm Madubuike. Okay. I mean, I think that's a fair judgment. I think I'd go the other direction on that, but I admittedly, it's worth discussion at that point.
And I also think, and to tie this back to Lamar, I think the bottom line of that is that there is more juice to squeeze out of this offense than we saw this past year. I think that if you look at the argument around MVP and why Lamar wasn't unanimous MVP, and I don't think he should have been. I think more people should have probably voted against Lamar being first for MVP in the first place. So I think there was a more than reasonable case for that. But I think the part of the reason that Lamar was held back from that was similar to 2019. The Ravens played a lot with a lot of leads. What they did and how they dictated those games during those times didn't require Lamar to rise up. Once Andrews went out, you saw in like the Rams game, for example, or some other games where the defense didn't play as well. When Lamar was asked to, the last quarter of the year, he was phenomenal in terms of throwing the ball, in terms of touchdown rates. If he's asked to do that all year long, I absolutely think he can do that all year long. And I think they will do that all year long. And so as a result of that, you get a little bit of wiggle room in that regard of being able to know that your offense is going to do well. I want a guy we saw the impact that Matabike had on the Chiefs game. I want a guy that's going to have that impact in big games in those moments and influence games in that way. We did not see that from Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, I think we saw him have better years than other times, but I think he's a guy that at this stage of his career can be a bit more neutralized. And that if the choice between Matabike's peak output and Clowney's peak output, I want Matabike's.
We're watching different players here. I got to tell you, I think Matabike is a cleanup guy and a very elite cleanup guy. Not as great a first pressure guy, and the relationship between his pressures and his sacks would kind of tell you that. And that Clowney and his first pressures and Owe and his first pressures, which totally undervalued here, were what led to a lot of the Ravens sacks. Van Noy, also a good first pressure guy. Pierce, good first pressure guy. Just had the greatest, pursuit / cleanup guy imaginable in Matabike, benefiting to a large degree from what we saw. And that's not to minimize at all who Justin Matabike is. A good year in run defense, good year as a penetrating pass rusher. A guy who really no 3-tech no guard could stand up to directly in terms of blocking, but he's not the same first pressure impact player that Clowney is. Clowney is on a different level, and I'm seeing a different guy. That's my own vision of that.
I think over the balance of the year, or at least in the first half of the year, I would have agreed with you. But again, in the Chiefs game, I thought Matabike was potentially the best defensive player for the Ravens in that game. I mean, it's 6 or 7 pressures in that game, had the half sack, was influencing how the rest of the offensive line played. And I think that would be the only other, and we probably should get back to Lamar Jackson. The other credit that I think that I give Matabike is, like you said, if he's going to require a double team, that's going to make guys like Van Noy and Clowney, who are on the backside of their careers, be more effective because they know they're going to get those opportunities. You're going to be able to isolate on them less and isolate on Matabike more.
All right. Okay, great stuff. We're going to break this into 2 parts. I'll be back with Jordan in part 2. We're going to talk a little bit about more themes from 2023, some extended play things that happened. What happened when Lamar was forced not to pass? Because that happens a fair amount, and how he was able to make use of space and whatnot. And then look forward to 2024, what the Ravens need to do at the position, both in terms of Lamar's growth and in terms of the possibility of getting a different backup quarterback. So we'll cover all that in part 2. Jordan, thanks for coming on, but tell folks where they can find your work online and talk football with you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Ravens Sit Room. Love to see you there and chat some Ravens football.
All right, other folks out there, you probably have heard by now, doing a historical series this offseason on your favorite Raven who is not one of the all-time greats. So don't need any about the top 20 guys in Ravens history. I want to hear if you like Chad Williams or Anthony Levine. And in particular, if you have a player you really enjoyed prior to 2000, I really want to get you older fans involved in this and engaged, because those guys are forgotten in a lot of ways. And sometimes this particular instance and the stories around what they did in those early Ravens years won't be retold to younger fans. So it's your opportunity to jump on and enjoy that Ravens history, a little stroll down memory lane. But really would appreciate it. DM's always open on Twitter. Preserve your player as quickly as you can. We got some good ones chosen. Ovi Mahaley, Paul Kruger, and everybody seemed to want to do Jarrett Johnson as their favorite non-star player. Okay, so Jarrett Johnson is taken, folks. I've literally like 3 different people. It was their first choice. So anyway, love to hear from you on that. Jordan, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
I will talk to you on part 2. Any trip to the bathroom or anything here?
No, I'm good to go.
All right, let's leave a little more of a break here, and then I'm going to go out to 44:45 here. All right, here we go. Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for part 2 of our season review, and the last of them on the quarterback position, which is largely a review of Lamar Jackson's year. We'll talk a little bit about Tyler Huntley on this episode. Here to do that with me is Jordan Coe. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me here.
Pleasure as always, Jordan. Always great to talk football with you. Boy, we got some shots that went well wide of the pin in that first episode, but we hope still some good discussion about the relative tag difficulty of Lamar Jackson and Justin Madubuike. You might want to go back and listen to that, about some of the spreading of the field and how that benefited Lamar in other ways, like going to the tight ends and all the effectiveness he had that, despite the fact there was many fewer targets. Jordan talked a little bit about running back injuries being one of the reasons why the Ravens couldn't be the kind of dominant steamrolling offense they were in 2019, but more of a sputtering but yet explosive offense that still was 5th in the league in points per drive, which is good, but it's just not as great as the Ravens were 4 years ago. Talked a little bit about Todd Monken. Anyway, great listen. Go download that and take a listen to that one first here, and I'm sure you won't be out of sorts here where we're starting. But I think we'll get back to a little bit. We talked a little bit about the loss of a step, the changes in the run game. But I think one of the really nice things this year is Lamar's changes on extended plays, and specifically that there wasn't one guy that he had to go to. And we've seen in past years that's been Mark Andrews a high percentage of the time that he's gone to. And I mean, I think we can all, if I name 6 players here, you should each have a play that comes to mind for each of these guys. But Aguilar, touchdown in the end zone on the extended play. It was like 9 seconds almost. Flowers, numerous extended plays, really became quite the target. Andrews himself, of course, still a target, of course. How about Gus Edwards on that 80-yard pass? And it wasn't the only time he found space behind the defense as a play extended. Bateman turned out to be a guy who could come back for the football, work his way all the way across the field on a couple of plays. And then Isaiah Likely. I mean, one play that I think we're all going to take from this season as a memory is Likely going up in double coverage and coming down with a football that Lamar threw under heavy duress.
Yeah, that was a tremendous play against Jacksonville. The extended plays has been, Lamar's always had the capability to do that. And I think that we're in for more of that next year, because I think teams have this really difficult decision about blitzing or not blitzing. And not every team has the secondary that the Chiefs have. And so if you're going to go heavy up front and the Ravens are going to throw the ball against you, Lamar has found his way to be able to beat the blitz and do so in devastating fashion and do so quickly. The Detroit game is the one that comes to mind. Yes. They decided they wanted to bring pressure, and he just ripped them because they didn't have the secondary for it. So I guess if you've got the secondary for it, then you've got a great defense, and that's a different conversation altogether. But I think you're going to see game plans where the Ravens have their checks and they're ready, and that's another credit to Monken, having Lamar be prepared against the blitz in a way that we have not seen in years past. What does that do? It reduces the number of guys that you see rushing the passer, and then these guys they have to play contain against Lamar. They can't crash in, they can't run all the way up the field. Lamar can't know that he's run past them, right? And in those instances, he's going to burn you as well. And so if that's going to happen, then Lamar's going to have 4 to 5 seconds in the pocket whenever he wants. It's almost like changing the name of the game of how much time a quarterback has before he has to get rid of the ball. Because there have definitely been moments, and I think you and I have watched games together, where there have been times where they're like, Lamar, you got to get rid of the ball. And he doesn't. And then 4 seconds later, 50 yards of magic happen. And I don't think that's going away in terms of what we're going to see from Lamar in this offense anytime soon.
So we just watched a Super Bowl that we didn't want to watch. And we noticed that Nick Bosa was really in charge of containing that Mahomes right. on a lot of plays and trying to keep him in the pocket. What that does in order of neutralizing Nick Bosa as a pass rusher cannot be overlooked. And I think the Ravens did a really good job this year at times, really getting some good pass rushes slowed down. San Francisco was one of them in terms of forcing their guys past the pocket. And it becomes a something the tackle can really take to the bank is you can cheat towards the inside because if they're maintaining lane integrity, they really don't want to be blocked 12-6. They don't want to have to try and come back and get the quarterback. That's a recipe for Lamar having a 20-yard run. So they don't want to let that happen. And what it means is that tackle is able to cheat to the inside and defend heavier on the inside, almost force you to try and take that step outside. Then that defensive player, that edge player, doesn't know if he's being hoodwinked under the system to just basically clear a rush lane for Lamar. It was even that much more when Keaton Mitchell's on the team and you had the possibility of draws under those circumstances. And, you'd have an edge rusher who basically just could not take a chance on getting caught outside. And Mitchell caught a few teams on tape very effectively at being, over rushing basically and creating a huge level 2 opportunity for him. And he didn't miss on his level 2 opportunities this year.
Yeah, absolutely. The sky is the limit for the diversity of where this offense can go. They've done a lot of things in a lot of different ways. They need to learn how to compact them in together and process them quickly and get the calls in quickly and give Lamar the discretion to be able to get everybody adjusted. If they do, the way Lamar runs the ball is just this offense at full capacity and full health should be unstoppable behind Lamar. And so it'll be very interesting to see kind of how they play those things out in 2024. But his ability to extend plays is what breaks the whole thing, because you can hold up coverage for 3.5 seconds. You can not get pressure. You can assume the pocket would break down at that point. And that's the point where defenses count on all of that happening. And so when Lamar can extend it past that's the game breaker.
Most quarterbacks, they aren't better with more time. And Lamar is that rare bird who, when you include, particularly when you include the scrambles, and I'm not sure if most systems they really do include the scrambles. If they typically talk things like passer rating or this or that, but if you include the scrambles, you're getting a lot of value there that is part of having an extended play. One stat I've been a big proponent of is the forced not to pass stat, and I came up with this in 2019, and Lamar was incredibly. When you combined his scrambles and the times he was sacked, he had 5.6 yards per play on those in 2019. That includes all of his sacks, but also all of his scrambles, which is just that jaw-dropping number to me. He's still good now, but he's down to 2.6 yards. So he got sacked 37 times for 218 yards, which is not bad, especially in terms of the yards lost per sack. And then he scrambled 72 times for 498 yards. So pretty high percentage of his total yards came on scrambles this year as opposed to designed runs. But that is one element of Lamar's game that will probably never be back to the same level, no matter how well the Ravens spread the field and no matter how much they try and manipulate edge defenders in this way. There probably going to be countermeasures put in place between spies and other things to preclude that from ever being as good again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that, or if the Ravens can develop a passing game that goes over the top of that. I mean, the thing about spies is that it means there's one fewer pass rusher, or it means there's one fewer guy dropping in pass defense. And so that seems to be the next thing that, the Ravens got, I won't call it lucky, but there seemed to be a tendency early from some teams to not want to try and spy Lamar, and the Ravens sliced them up when they did that. They need to figure out what they're doing to ensure that they continue to kind of have that same efficiency level when that spy comes back in.
Right. The Chiefs went to 2 spies at the end of the game, a lot of 3-man rush with 2 spies. It is something the Ravens need to be prepared to deal with. But I do think some of the success of the tight ends this year probably can be attributed to that as well. If you use a spy, you got to know how to use a spy. And I think what it means basically against Jackson is that spy needs to be responsible for outside contain on the side that the pocket is broken basically immediately. And it's very hard. Anticipation comes with that. And if Lamar were able to see that that's what that spy was doing irregularly, and I think that's Wasa Karamoa and Wilson, we've seen that from in the division in particular. I think if he could detect that that's going on, there's ways he could manipulate it and use the middle of the field even more. So, if you're wondering, like, how does that space get any more valuable to Lamar? That could be one way. All right. Lamar's leadership on the field. You start us off on that. What were you happy with? Maybe what you're not happy with.
Oh, I'm happy with all of it. I think that you can't be less excited about how this team is going to move forward with a more vocal leader in terms of what he's getting. I think his professional approach, and how he brought that to the team. He's still fun and funny and joking around at times, but there are also times where he is setting the tone and saying, this is serious. This is about getting to the Super Bowl. This is just about running up the score in some of these games. Obviously, vocal on the field also means some of the checks, some of the recognition, involvement in the play calling, and involvement in the game planning before they get there. I think that that's an underrated value of any offensive player. The more voice that they get in that process, the more like you're just saving time, right? Like the NFL is all about, on a week-to-week basis for these games, is about how much time do you have to get ready for this next game, right? Yeah. If you can save 3 hours of film review and 3 hours of preparation, you can lock in 5 to 6 plays out of the playbook that your quarterback and probably the players that he wants to run those with are already on the same page about. You're winning that time back in the process. You get that from a more vocal leader in the process. I think we're only going to see a continued more vocal Lamar in this process. And I think we're just getting the stunted growth of what a lot of other quarterbacks have in their bag and their ability when they're given the keys immediately in this process. And this is just the natural evolution of what we were going to see from this. I think you didn't see an overly vocalized Patrick Mahomes as a rookie, but you see a vastly over vocalized Patrick Mahomes now. And so there's nothing but good that can come of that, in
my opinion. By the way, completely on balance, very positive. I'll say Coach Evans had a good comment he used to make on the show about how when Lamar was not able to run the same way, he'd become Russell Wilson. That was actually a compliment at the time. Russell Wilson now is kind of a pejorative quarterback in some ways, the way things are. But he certainly was a great quarterback when Coach made the topic. And I made the comment, and I think that Lamar has some of that in him. He's become a better field general in a lot of ways. There are elements of his comportment that certainly have improved, and some that have slipped as well. Now, last year, punting the football after I think it was a delay of game penalty. That's over the top stupid. I mean, he could have gotten flagged for delay of game on the play. I think it was a delay of game that actually occurred, but he could have gotten flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct or something for after the play. This year, probably the biggest on-field expression of leadership was him not taking Ronnie Stanley's hand after Ronnie failed to make a block for him ahead. And that was, of course, the game where Ronnie came back and made a big touchdown block for him. And to me, I'm okay with that kind of leadership, but there is a limit. You use a currency when you do it, and particularly you probably use a currency with certain types of players. Not sure exactly where Stanley fits in with that. Stanley may understand well enough that was completely justified at the time, or he may feel like, man, he's laying all that on me. And I don't know if you're Bateman or you're Beckham or you're Flowers, if that's as easy to take. It's probably easier for an offensive lineman to understand, yeah, I screwed up that time. I get a ton of at-bats, but that one I screwed up. And I have to come back from that.
Yeah, I mean, he can be and have a little bit of like immature tendencies from time to time, but we've seen Tom Brady break iPads. We've seen all kinds. I mean, you saw Travis Kelce in Andy Reid's face during the Super Bowl. I mean, these to act like Lamar doing these kind of things is just only Lamar doing that in the league. I mean, we're putting him under a microscope by reviewing the entire balance of the season, but I think it gets pretty tough to get through an entire NFL season without having probably 5 of those moments. And you hope that you hope as few of them are caught on camera as possible.
That is very, very, very true. Nice thing for the Chiefs and Taylor Swift is anything that happens after a play almost never gets caught because they have to switch to Taylor Swift in the booth. By the way, am I upset that Taylor Swift was on camera for 40 seconds? I'm not. I'm upset that it's 20 times 2 seconds that we're missing post-play emotion, which is the most valuable time you can have in terms of understanding what went wrong on a play, is to see what players are talking to each other. I don't care what Taylor Swift thinks about the play. I want to know what the Ravens cornerbacks think about whose responsibility it was to cover Travis Kelce on that play, and see if they, how they messed up. That's my 2 cents on that shit situation there. The Ravens did a great job in terms of taking the stretch run, basically taking the MVP for Lamar with both their defense and their offense. Obviously, the offense played great down the stretch. They beat everybody who was in front of them, and they beat some of the other MVP candidates, most notably McCaffrey and Purdy in the big game in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar is an MVP competitive player in a 17-game season every single year. And depending on the quality of the defense, I think is really going to tell you a lot about where that ranks. I think the worse you get this inverse correlation that the worse the defense is going to play, the better season you're going to see statistically overall from Lamar, because you have to. The Ravens love to grind the time down on the clock. They love to not have their offensive players taking a lot of plays. They love to do all that kind of stuff. And so if they're winning, they're going to, like under John Harbaugh, they're going to do it. We all might hate it, but they're going to do it. That's going to be the approach. That's the plan. That's what it is. Get on board or root for another team.
It's basic fantasy football logic is that you want a good receiver on a bad team. That's ideal. So get Andre Hopkins because he's your guy. Because first of all, he's the it's the notion that Lamar Jackson needs to get a 4,000-yard season is just so stupid. Just so freaking stupid. In terms of this, we know the best thing in the world would be if Lamar plays 17 games and doesn't have a 4,000-yard season, because then the Ravens are dominating game after game. It really wouldn't happen otherwise. Anyway, frustrating as hell.
Yeah, Lamar, and you know what? Lamar's got 2 MVPs now. He's got all but 1 vote in 2 years on those. I bet you if you asked him point blank and he was being honest, he could give a crap less about any future MVPs. At this point, the only MVP that he's going to care about winning is Super Bowl MVP. Like the rest of it, like he would. I'm sure. Look, I think Lamar will win another MVP in this league because I think he's that dynamically talented. I think it's very possible he wins more than one. And I'm sure he'll be happy to take those accolades. But at the end of the day, I do think that he is really locked in on the Super Bowl. And I think he's going to be really locked in next year because of that too.
Yeah. So what does Lamar need to do for 2024? That's the next set of questions we'll really want to get into here. And so we'll talk about what Lamar and then what the Ravens, if they really have anything they need to do in terms of their backup quarterback position, I guess is something we want to discuss. But in terms of mechanics, my first thought is that he needs to continue whatever he's doing in terms of off-season programs that improve his mechanics.
Yeah, whatever he did leading into this year is great. I mean, Lamar threw the ball fantastic this year from all different art angles. His recognition around a lot of that stuff was great. I think that, you take the fumble in the Chiefs game as the trade-off of kind of those extended plays, but that none of that seemed to be overly technical. I mean, if you look at the improvement from 2018 until now and how Lamar throws the ball, it's phenomenal. I mean, there were definitely plays in 2018 where he threw the ball into the ground, where he's looking at a guy, there's 15 yards away from him, there's nobody between them, and he throws the ball into the ground. And now you don't see that. Now Lamar's putting the ball in the right spot. I mean, the throw to Likely that you referenced earlier in the Jacksonville game, perfectly thrown ball in terms of where it needed to be in that spot. There have been some other throws. I guess I would say the only thing I would like to see Lamar do a bit differently is put a little bit more air under some of these deep shots that he takes to give his receivers a chance to go and get them. And then you say that, and then he does it in the Chiefs game, and it turns into the interception. So, I would rather him continue to be turnover averse, even if it means missing a couple of deep shots every game.
That's a great point about the deep ball, because I think, my view of this season is that's a problem really specific to the balls he throws to Bateman. And it's almost like he doesn't trust Bateman, and he overthrows him far more, or an order of magnitude more than any other receiver. So yeah,
I think it's a problem. I think Lamar has always thrown a little bit tighter of a rope in terms of those deep balls and not put timing and air under it. And so I don't think it's exclusive to Bateman, and I don't think it's exclusive to this year.
Well, fair enough. This year, I mean, it's one of the things I really want in 24 is for him to have a higher degree of deep ball trust in Bateman to come back and get the football. And Bateman has actually done pretty well coming back underneath. He hasn't been perfect or anything. The passer rating throwing to him was not great for the whole year. So I'm not saying that everything is perfect or not, but he's a very important player for the Ravens to develop in year 4 here. I don't expect him, by the way, where are you on that in terms of the 50-year tag on Bateman?
I think it's a no. I think that wide receiver there's so much. I mean, when you can get Zay Flowers at 22 to come in and be as good as he is, it just makes it really hard to pay at the wide receiver position. If you're going to pay likely to stay on board as well long term, I think that's really if you've decided that you want that 12 personnel, that you want to extend Andrews and you want to get likely and you want them to be together for kind of like a core set of like 3 or 4 years, then I think there's not cap room on the offensive side of the ball to have Bateman here.
Okay. I think it's a no also, by the way. And I think Owe is a definite yes, given where the two of them are in their careers. But I did want to get your thoughts on that. Bateman, it doesn't matter whether he's going to be in Baltimore for 1 year or more than that with some sort of re-signing. So some sort of, they could still extend him after or during year 4, or even before year 4. If they really wanted to do that. I just think they have a lot of fish to tend here in terms of what they do before this season starts, and particularly during the point where Matabike might be tagged, that they'll have to kind of work through. But I would like to see him stay a Raven. I think he could still be a very good receiver, and just the last 2 seasons, tremendously disappointed that he has not broken out to a greater degree. He's made progress. It's just, I'm tremendously disappointed.
I think some of it is I think we talked about this recently on a different podcast where we were talking about how the Ravens seemingly in the first 3 years of these guys don't give them full scale opportunities that if they did leading up to that point, that they would be better. Rashad Bateman's openness and separation all year long has been phenomenal. That if he was Lamar Jackson's first read on every play all year long, and we got the separation that he gave us this year, the Ravens would have absolutely lit it up. And I don't understand the disconnect there between the coaching and getting him higher up the read chart because of that.
I've got to respond to that in a certain way. I thought that was true because I've seen on the PFF separation graphs, he's looked tremendous. And they had that. There's some other measure of separation being used because he looks terrible on the next gen separation information. And so that's XY based. And I think the others has to use that same XY data because I don't know what else there would be to give you specific amounts of separation. So here are the possibilities. One is it could be definitional, meaning one is at the time the ball is released and the other is at the time of the catch. And so, some underneath receivers or whatever are getting different amounts of incremental separation because of the case of either of those. Tight ends really dominate the statistic, which would tell me right off that it's not really, speed or even route running based. It's mostly a case of finding soft spots in zones and things like that are a high percentage of that. It's like 6 of the top 11 are tight ends, if I recall correctly. It might be 5, but it's in that neighborhood. It's not. Zay Flowers was in the top 15 or so, but Bateman was down about the 30th percentile on the next gen stats. So something to look at. I would love to have somebody out there explain to me what the difference in definition is between these two measures of separation we're seeing, by the way, because I saw the same thing you did, Jordan, in terms of of
Well,
getting good separation.
that's the eye test, I think, of separation when I'm watching games too. So it's not just, and when you go back and you watch the all 22. So it's not just like I've seen the same PFF stat that you have, but there are 5 to 6 times a game that Rashad Bateman is glaringly open and he is far enough down the read chart that he's just not going to get the ball. And it doesn't even matter. And so it's just, I just don't know how a layperson like me can see that, and how the Ravens coaching staff can see that, and how they cannot figure out some way to adjust something to at least make him the quick first read, or trying like it seems like one of those ones where if Lamar had a few more throws to him per game early that were easy throws and they got into a rhythm together and Lamar trusted him to look to him, they could take advantage of it. It just seems peculiar to me.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly makes sense. And it certainly is a great thing to work on when you make the earlier point that I think there's more juice to squeeze from Lamar.
Yeah.
So, one thing that's probably going to be true next year is the Ravens are not going to be playing with the lead as often because they pretty much led every game this year until the last one. They led every game in the last 2 minutes. So, the only counter to that is that they cannot face as tough a schedule. So they faced this year. They only played 3 teams the whole year with losing records. It's just incredible when you really think about that. And we know they went 11-3, 10-4, whichever it was, against teams with winning records during the regular season, and then 1-1 during the playoffs, obviously. But it's I don't think they're likely to play with the lead as often in 24.
Some of that depends on what they try and do with the offense as well, and whether they are a bit more aggressive and high octane earlier in some of these situations. But I tend to agree with you. That's just, no matter what, like any combination of how you want to cut that, it's going to be hard to be that dominant.
And they also have to continue to be as dominant defensively. And I think they almost certainly have to take a step back defensively somehow from being one of the greatest defenses even the Ravens have ever seen. Not the greatest, but one of the top 4 defenses the Ravens have ever had probably this year. And I don't think they're going to be able to replicate that with all the loss in personnel that they're facing right now.
But their out of division schedule is not nearly as menacing looking overall when you kind of take a look at it. You got the Commanders, but Broncos, Raiders, Giants.
So play the AFC
Bucks.
West and the NFC East, right?
That's right.
And then they play the Bucks as their 1-1 matchup, which is the best possible 1v1 matchup. Whereas last year they got 2v2 and it ended up being the Lions.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one. Yeah, it's just a weird circumstance to have to play the NFC West, the AFC South, which ended up being pretty uniformly balanced and good this year, but not great overall because they had Tennessee, but uniformly balanced and good. And then you get the Lions, who are an up and coming team. It was a bad and the NFC West. Tough group. All right. Talk about a little bit about working through progressions. Anything you'd like to see there different from Lamar?
Yeah, part of me wants to see him be able to recognize when he needs to check down and when he could run the ball and pick up 6, 7, 8, 12 yards and just take it in those circumstances. There were probably 6 instances of that in the Kansas City game that if he would have done that, it would have made all the difference in the world. And I think that mentality can be pervasive with the offense. So I think that Zay Flowers extending for the touchdown, for example, when you have trust that your team can move the ball, when you don't feel like you're pressing, when you don't always feel like you're trying to hit the touchdown on every single play, when you're doing that, can bring a sense of calm to an offense. When they feel like they can move the ball and they can feel like they can stay in rhythm and they can feel like they can stay in front of the chains the way they need to. They've done that historically at times, and Lamar has been great in some of those moments. It felt like there are just times this year where he really was, the fumble in the Chiefs game that they lost, that was going to be a touchdown to Rashad Bateman. He was he was wide open. There was a chasm between him and the closest defender. And if Ronnie Stanley holds up for half a second longer, it's a touchdown. And the game is completely different. I think that, and it doesn't play out the same way it plays out as a result of that.
You're not actually pegging that on Stanley because it was an extended pocket, but
right. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that if his protection had lasted half a second longer, it would have been a touchdown, right? And so that's the trade-off that you're taking, right? Which is that we've seen Lamar extend that very same play and turn it into a touchdown several times this year, right? Mm-hmm. And so you just have to decide where you are on the spectrum of all of that. And you got to pick and choose your spots, how many times you want to do that. And I think that's coaching and preparation as you go into games, where it's like, we're going to wear them down. We want to run more plays. We want to see what they're doing. We want to idea it. We want to attack it, not because we saw it happen on the field, but because we know it's coming in the first place. And if you could get Lamar, that would be the only mentality shift that I'd want to change. But you can still go through your progressions quickly. Those things could not be there. And Lamar is going to extend the play for 6 or 7 seconds and do something catastrophic or amazing on whichever side the outcome ends up coming to be, even as a result of that. So I don't think you're taking away some of the explosive plays that could come as a result of that by saying that when you can get to a 3rd and 2, you should almost always take that in exchange of not knowing what's going to happen for 2 seconds on an NFL field.
Right. Sure. I mean, I think, yeah, definitely with Lamar Jackson, I want 3rd and 2 all day long, pretty much, in terms of getting opportunities, even though that does kind of limit your 1st and 2nd down offense to not giving you a lot of yards. The Ravens have certainly, proved in 2019, at least that's a winning formula. Did think that the loss of Andrews really helped him move through different progressions at different orders. So I think we saw some of that as the season progressed. It did look like Beckham was his go-to guy as the receiver for a good long while. Flowers was more of a gadget guy. Really liked the way that they changed having Flowers be a down the field threat more as the season went on.
Oh, yeah. Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson are going to have a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns together when this is all said and done. I think that as he becomes the primary read for Lamar from a wide receiver perspective, with Andrews on board and with likely evolving that he has, I just, it's going to be really hard for teams to defend that.
All right. Great stuff. Let's talk about game management skills a little bit. And maybe just talk about some things you'd like to see from Lamar in that way, and maybe we'll each take turns naming one. You want to start?
Sure. I would like to see the Ravens run more no huddle. I know that they hate to do it because they think it runs down the clock. And there's nothing in the rules that say if you run no huddle, you have to snap the ball as soon as you get to the line of scrimmage, right? I want them to get, and I mentioned this earlier, I want them to be able to get to the line. And let's say that they are in a 2 tight end personnel like they were against the Chiefs, where they have a loaded box. They got 8 guys in the box. I want to see them split out 4 wide, put both tight ends into slot positions, force those defenders to spread out, and then give Lamar a choice to look and see if he thinks the running angles are there on a draw. If he's got the isolated pass opportunity to Likely or to Andrews, if they're going to give extra coverage there and they're going to press on the outside, is someone going to get beat over the top? Give him the time in those situations to make those adjustments and be able to flex in and out of those spaces. You've got the personnel to do it now, but you've got to get to the line of scrimmage faster. They were better about getting the calls in more quickly, but I think they've got to do an even better job of that if they really, really, really want to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big advantages of it, and the Patriots offense certainly understood this when they had 2 tight ends, is that you freeze the defensive personnel. And you force them to leave the personnel on the field. And if they try and switch out, you'll catch them with 12 men on the field, and it's an easy 5 yards. If you go ahead and get those guys to the line of scrimmage, just as Jordan said, you can take as long as you want to reestablish that what your formation looks like. Well, as long as you want within reason. But part of that has to come with the relay of that play has to be quick enough, or it has to be of a different nature, that all you're doing is calling a formation that basically, is like choice A or something you're saying. And everybody knows what that means in terms of formation. You go there, Lamar has 2 or 3 plays he can call at the line of scrimmage. He makes one of the calls while everybody's up there up front. And then you go ahead and run that. I would love for the offense to be run that way. But there have been in the past anyway problems getting that relay made into the huddle in time. And obviously, if you want to run no huddle, you can just do that at the line of scrimmage. It's at times that seemed like a lot for Lamar to handle. I think he did a better job of it in 2023, but I still wouldn't say he's all the way there yet into like a Mahomes or Brady level of commanding that sort of offense.
But that's also why you've got to do it quickly, because you have the offensive coordinator is allowed to be in Lamar's helmet, I think, until like 12 or 14 seconds to the play clock.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not when they break the huddle, they break the communication. The offensive coordinator can still be in his ear as they're running to the line of scrimmage. So Lamar doesn't even have to be the one that is seeing and identifying all of that. It can be his part to see one part of it. The offensive coordinator together, they can work on that and communicate it together, get to the line of scrimmage, and then have your couple checks and what you want to do with that. So I don't think the Ravens should run. It should. I mean, the Patriots in their kind of in the Gronk Hernandez era were running that all the time and running full no huddle 3/4 of the game and just keeping that pressure up on you. I don't think that's something the Ravens are going to do, but it's something that when it's not working or when they want to catch teams off guard or when they need to score. Like I think there were times in this Chiefs game where I wanted to see something like that, where what felt like the push to do more was the push to throw down the ball down the field more, as opposed to get to the line of scrimmage and pressure the defense more. And they've got to figure out, I think, a counter to that, and being quicker to the line of scrimmage, I think, can help them with that.
Okay, I'm buying all that. I love the idea of running that. It will mean, basically no huddle or sugar huddle to probably freeze that defensive personnel, but 12 incredibly good kind of personnel to have on the field to freeze the opponent, because you could do a lot of things with 12 or 13 for that matter in terms of different ways you align that. Once you have 3 wide receivers on the field, it's pretty well set how you're going to line up. You don't have a lot of different options. So 12 is a great place to be. I'd like to see him read the defense better at the line of scrimmage. That's still something I think he's improved, but I think that could be another focus of off-season film work and some mechanical work that he might do, is to try and be loud at the line of scrimmage and be able to do that, to change the play, to be able to do it silent when you're on the road, to do all the things that you could take advantage of in terms of being an at the line of scrimmage quarterback.
And I think some of that has to sync with play calling. I think we're going to see a big improvement of that this year with Monken being in year 2. Part of the reason why Reed, Mahomes, and Kelsey work so well together is the longevity of how long they've been doing it together. They're able to kind of move around, know certain formations, know certain defenses. They've had plays against certain formations and things that they've done and route combinations that they've done, they've already seen together. And so they know how to adjust to them on the fly. Some of that is just going to have to happen in games, and you're just going to have to pay the price of learning it at certain times. And if learning it in this Chiefs game a few weeks ago was the way that they did that, great. But I think that I don't think that we'll see. I think it will take till at least 2025 to get Lamar to the level that you're talking about, only because he was so stunted from realistically 18, 19, and 20 were years where I don't think he was being taught to read defenses like that. And not just not being taught, not putting in game situations where he learned it in the game. It gets imprinted into your memory because of what happened, and learn to adjust.
Well, it's a fair question to ask. Has Lamar in general, his ability to lead on field, been reduced by the fact that the Ravens have almost never needed him to do so in terms of game situation? They've had so few comebacks in his career, and yet Lamar still got an incredible record. That's obviously a matter of they're just getting the lead early and keeping it. And that the statistics for Lamar having the lead at halftime are remarkable in terms of how often he's done it and how often he retains the lead from that point. It's something that obviously potentially can put you in not situations where you need to have fourth quarter game winning drives, which, by the way, really stupid way to rank quarterbacks relationally in terms of how valuable they are.
The whole quarterback value to win concept is a silly one for a lot of reasons. And you've heard a lot of and even Kurt Warner, who I think is kind of dumb in terms of his criticisms of Lamar, has come out and said, he's like, I've led what would have been game winning comebacks, but the other team scored right before in not very much time on the other side of that. And that was the difference between me winning one Super Bowl and winning two Super Bowls, right? And whatever that looks like. So it is very silly that it's executed that way.
Yeah. This is a year where Lamar wasn't bad on interceptions, obviously, but there were still a fair amount of turnovers by the Ravens in terms of the fumbles. And, some of that we saw earlier was mesh point difficulty. And particularly had some with Justice Hill, where he got the fumble, but the ball never really got properly into the mesh point. It's still something Lamar can work on, something Hill needs to work on, something other running backs need to work on. Could be a new running back, obviously, this year in terms of somebody they want to put the ball into the mesh point with. It's kind of going to be an ongoing thing as long as they're going to want to pull out of that.
It's the most underrated part about the Mark Ingram era of the Ravens offense. And I don't know what happened between week 10 and week 14 to Mark Ingram. There must have been some kind of minor turned more significant injury that really took some of the juice out of his game. But his ability to read that mesh point and effectively, without saying a word, communicate openly with Lamar about what that looked like was a huge part of the effectiveness of the 2019 offense.
Right.
If they find a primary, replacing, whether they bring Gus Edwards back or not, and I think Gus Edwards is a good fit for this offense, is that kind of short yardage back anyway. So it's not that I want to see him gone, but prioritizing somebody that understands that mesh point and whether they know why Ingram and Lamar had that kind of like successful gelling together at the mesh point. If they could replicate that with another running back that was similar to Mark Ingram, then you're not going to pay a lot in terms of cap, in terms of what you're going to get, but you're going to get really good bang for your buck, because those fumbles are things that you need to have go away. And then you're going to need somebody that's going to be able to absorb a number of those snaps for you in those situations before Keaton Mitchell gets fully back to health, and potentially after Keaton Mitchell gets fully back to health.
You and I went to the game out in LA together this year, the Chargers game. And that was a game where Zay Flowers on the game-winning touchdown took the ball away from Lamar. It's supposed to go the other way around. And something tells me while it's always nice to get together and just throw the ball with other receivers, sometimes the wrong receivers are involved in that. And with the Ravens, it was James Prochet was a guy who was often involved. And it just didn't fit in the Ravens' plans. Wasn't that significant. It seems like the Ravens, first of all, in terms of throwing the ball around and spending time down in Lamar's backyard or wherever they decide to go, where Lamar lives probably, and meet on some field there to throw the ball around. Every receiver should want to do it, but it should be really important that Bateman, Flowers, likely, the most significant targets are there. Maybe Aguilar again, are there to try and understand just, where you're going to put the football. Where do I want you to break? Where am I expecting you to break? All of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. All of those coordination things, I think, all continue to improve another year down the road within the offense, running the same plays, keeping the ones that worked, building, adding on to those things. I do think that, there is plenty more. I think there's plenty more juice to squeeze, even if the Ravens were to be leading as much as they did last year, again, next year. I still think that we'll see an improved performance from the same iteration of the offense.
Okay. All right, I wanted to do something fun here because I think it was Jordan and I who did the quarterback preview show for the year. And it was in one of these 2-player episodes, except with Lamar Jackson, he gets his own episode. So it's a 1-player episode, as you can see, because it takes forever to talk about Lamar Jackson, of course. But it was, what's a good year? What's a great year? In his case, what's an off the chart year? I'm just going to read what I had for good before. And I think we probably had pretty good agreement on these. Good was via some combination of run and pass improvements. The Ravens improved scoring efficiency to approximately 2.4 points per drive without sacrificing defensive freshness. Jackson's per-run efficiency is high when split by scrambles and designed runs. Lamar plays 15-plus games. The Ravens make the playoffs, and he's there for all postseason games. They easily cleared that hurdle for a good year for Lamar Jackson, right? We agree?
Very much so.
2.48 points per drive. And by the way, you're going to see in the second one that I'm probably going to give him credit for this, but league offense was down. The offense across the league was down much significantly this last year. So 2.48 really would have been a higher number in other years. But my great season for him was Jackson's lead the Ravens back to a points per drive of 2.65. I would say the 2.48 in 2023 points is probably worth just about that, with a good portion of the success derived from Lamar's improved distribution of the football. Lamar seamlessly handles changes in pace as needed, fast or slow. We probably got most of that. Passer rating returns to 100 plus due to reduced turnovers, better playmakers, and better scheme. Malkin and Lamar are lauded as an outstanding new tandem. We hit on pretty much all of that.
Yeah, that you could have written that at the end of the season almost.
I could have,
minus a couple of the details of the statistics, and it falls definitely within there.
Yeah, you know what? It is out there, by the way. That podcast is out there, and I know I read it word for word because that's why I did a lot of these. Is the off the charts one I have is we get into long, heated debates about which was Lamar's greatest season, 2019 or 2023, with 2023 fans pointing to playoff success as the tiebreaker. So unfortunately, without hoisting the Lombardi, I don't think the Ravens can do that. And they did win a playoff game. That was something. It was a step forward, I think, in some ways to win a divisional game. But I still don't think there's any question about whether 2019 or 23 was the greater year.
Yeah, I think that the 2019 offense also, when you look at it collectively in terms of their performance, that again, if Lamar would have been a unanimous MVP this year, I would have been happy about it, but thought that there certainly was a case to be made to vote for somebody else. Yeah. And that would have been okay if somebody had. So, as you look at it in kind of like this broader instance, yeah, I think this wasn't his greatest season. But I guess the semantics of the term off the charts, it certainly, if we got the level of performance that we get from Lamar this year for every year for the rest of his career, we're going to be very, very happy as Ravens fans.
Obviously. Yes.
Yeah. There will be going to be multiple MVPs and multiple Super Bowls that are going to be on the mantle as a result of that. So I think, was it better than 2019? No. Was it off the charts in that regard? Right? Like you and I would trade our souls to get this performance from Lamar Jackson for the rest of his entire career on the Ravens team, right? Yeah. So in that sense, how can that not be off the charts?
Yeah. All right. Well, one area we didn't hit on so far was the backup quarterback situation. Where are you on Tyler Huntley and whether or not the Ravens maybe need to reset with a younger guy?
I'm good with a reset, and I think the Ravens are geared up for a reset. That's why they signed his name is escaping me. The guy from the Patriots.
Malik Cunningham.
Malik Cunningham. The other Malik. Yes, I think that he was signed with the explicit intent to move on from Tyler Huntley. Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, if you're asking Tyler Huntley to win you a major game in a major moment, then you're going to get a fumble that's returned 99 yards for a touchdown, and you're going to get what you deserve.
Unfortunately, another game we went to together that is very forgettable. But all right, I'm with you on that. By the way, I think Huntley probably gets replaced. I'm not even sure that Malik Cunningham is the guy, but I think they'd be willing to take a flyer on a later round draft pick, maybe even an undrafted guy, and find the quarterback that they think could come in. It'd be nice to have a Jake Browning-esque kind of a backup for Lamar who could do a little thing with a great defense. Huntley, I just don't feel like during the regular season, he's certainly been great during the preseason. He's been good at other times, has ever really been somebody the Ravens could depend on.
Well, and it doesn't seem like there's been the trade market that I think a lot of Ravens fans, including you and I, believe that could exist for Tyler Huntley never manifested. The Ravens would have taken probably even a third or a fourth round pick this year for him if that was ever offered during any point during the year. So there's just that also tells you what the market thinks of Tyler Huntley kind of outside of Baltimore too.
Yeah. I think that's 100% fair. I don't remember exactly what year we had those discussions about what would it take to get Tyler Huntley away from the Ravens. I think it might have been 2 years ago, but I hope it was, because otherwise I feel very embarrassed about taking that kind of.
I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, the notion that it would take a second round pick, I don't think I was ever behind. But anyway, still, even a third, that would have been an unbelievable windfall for a player like Huntley.
Yeah.
All right. Always a pleasure talking football with you, Jordan. Just something that I appreciate every year. We're kind of at the end of our regular season content. I'm sure we're going to have you on for plenty of draft content. And I hope you pick a player to do on the historical pods we're doing. And then, of course, all the preview work we do. But tell people where they can talk football with you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Raven Sit Room. Always kind of looking for fun, interesting Ravens conversations. And hey, at least we've got the Orioles. Ken, we got something to look forward to.
There you go.
It's not all clouds and rain here in Baltimore.
Yeah, looking forward to that, by the way, in a big way. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, I want to hear from you. And any kind of idea is okay during the off season. So we don't have to have timely topics. We can talk about historical topics. You can talk about trends in the game of football. You can talk about franchise building topics. You can have multi-part topics if you want to talk about things that involve evolution or are larger in nature. Happy to do that with you. Just give me a DM on Twitter. They're always open. I'll get back to you very quickly, and we'll talk a little bit about your idea and how we can make that into a good, compelling show. Jordan, thanks again for coming on.
Glad to be here, Ken. Thanks for having me.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.